far as he... He's just watching what we're doing. What I'm doing. She's facing us now. 280 yards. There's some antelope right out there. We'll get a range on them.
Today we're going to talk about long-range shooting, and it seems like there's quite a bit of interest in that. Now, I've been shooting long-range for about a decade, actually a little bit more than a decade. And when I say long-range shooting, I'm talking about at least 400 yards and beyond. Let's say 400 to 1,000 yards. And so, how do you get into this sport? And what do you need to get into this sport? It's not a cheap sport. It's not an inexpensive sport. But it is extremely challenging, and I think it's a whole lot of fun. Obviously, one of the first things you're going to need is a rifle. This is a Browning BBR. It's chambered in 7mm Remington Magnum, and as you can see, it's a bolt action. And whenever one thinks about long-range shooting, they automatically think bolt action rifle, high caliber or large caliber rifle. Well, that's not really necessarily the case to get into and do well and really enjoy the sport of long-range shooting. One thing I'm concerned with any, let's say a bolt action, is a couple of things. First, you've got this opening right here, and you've got to make sure that that cartridge that you're placing in there will fit. Now, you got to say automatically, well, sure, it's going to fit. It's made for that round. Well, when you start reloading, and reloading is kind of an essential for long-range shooting, for very serious long-range shooting. When you start reloading, one of the things that you do is you play with bullet seating depth inside the case itself. And oftentimes, not always, oftentimes you're going to find you get the best accuracy, most consistent shooting, most precise rounds when that bullet is pulled out about as far as you can possibly get out of the mouth of that case till it's just about touching the lead area, the lands and grooves, where the lands and grooves start inside the barrel. It's called the lead area. Now, when you do that, a couple of bad things can happen with bolt action rifles, and that is that cartridge becomes so long that it no longer fits in here, and essentially you end up turning a bolt action rifle with a, in this case, a magazine. You end up turning that into a single shot, where you got to load it by hand, one at a time, just to make it fit, because it won't cycle through the action. It won't clear this this action when you do that. Now, that's not the biggest thing in the world. You may be able to get your gun to shoot really, really well without having to pull it out that far, and it still cycles through. And that's just great. Another thing about any of these actions, these kind of manual actions, if you want to call it that, non-semi-automatics, is that once you get into a nice prone position, and for serious long-range shooting, we're talking about shooting from the prone position. I'm not talking about shooting bench. That's the rifle shooting. If you're really going to get into long-range shooting, sure, you're going to do some stuff on the bench to make sure that your rifle is shooting like it's supposed to. But the challenging part comes when you are in the prone position, you and the rifle, and that is it. Maybe you're using a sling to give you the support that you need, the stability you need, or you're using a bipod. It doesn't matter. You're no longer on a bench, so you're in the prone position. Now, when you're in the prone position, you're going to see that it takes a little bit of doing to get yourself into the correct prone position. And you want to be in the exact same position every time you fire, because consistency is absolutely important to repeated accuracy. Consistency equals accuracy. Once you fire that first round and you go to take your second round, your second shot, you're going to have to cycle that bolt. And this has got a very short throw on it, but still you're going to bang, you're going to fire, and then while you're still in position, you're going to need to lift this up, cycle it back, throw it forward, and then down, and then get right back into the position again. You're going to break your position, okay? There's no two ways about that. The minimum amount of movement is, yes, it's critical, it certainly helps, but you are still moving, you are still breaking your position. That's a bit of a disadvantage. Now the second rifle I want to show you is a single action or single shot rifle. This is a Ruger No. 1 chambered in .220 Swift. I really like this rifle. It's got a bull barrel. I put this limb saver harmonics reducer on it. Actually, I reduced my average group size from just under MOA, just under 1 inch equivalent at 100 yards, to half MOA by using and adjusting this contraption right here. But nonetheless, this is a single shot rifle. Just like the bolt action though, you are going to break your position every time you fire. So bang, you fire, that's the closed position right there. So bang, you fire, and then you got to break that position, open it up, it's going to eject out here. You're going to grab another round and you're in the prone position. I usually set up my ammunition in front of me. I grab it, feed it in here, close it up, and then again I got to get back into that position and fire again. So just like the bolt action, we're breaking our position every time we fire. No way around that. Advantages of the single shot is, remember when I was talking just a little bit ago about kind of pulling that bullet seating out farther and farther so that it's just touching the lands and grooves, the lead area of the rifling. Well, with this one, you don't have to worry about going too far out for it to cycle through your action. There's no action here. You just seat that bullet in there, or that cartridge in there, close it up, and you're in business. This is another Ruger No. 1, as you can see. Again, just like all the other rifles, this one is empty, the action is wide open. This one is chambered in .243 Winchester, and this is actually a really nice caliber for long range shooting. And again, I'm talking about 400 to 1,000, even 1,000 plus with this thing. You don't have to be shooting .338 Lapuas, 7mm mags, 50 BMG, those sorts of things to really get into and enjoy the sport of long range shooting. In fact, those guns can be really, really difficult to get good with. There's one thing about long range shooting. You got to shoot a lot of rounds before you really get competent and comfortable with long range shooting. I've got hundreds of rounds through all of my long range guns, and this one kind of has become my go-to long range rifle. And it's certainly capable of 1,000-yard plus shots. Now you might say, well, hold on, how much energy does that .243 have at 1,000 yards? Well, folks, what we're talking about is shooting paper targets, maybe slapping a steel gong out at 1,000 yards. It doesn't have to have a whole lot of energy to go through a piece of cardboard, piece of paper, or make a sound against a gong. Now, the one disadvantage of this rifle is that it's got a sporter, tapered, fairly light barrel. When you're shooting long range, you're most likely going to have a fairly heavy 4 caliber bullet. Those are going to be longer bullets just to achieve enough weight. Okay, so they're called heavy 4 caliber bullets. Now, the reason why you have to have that is you want to have enough weight so that that bullet can retain energy as well as it can over long range. The way that it does that is by having a high ballistic coefficient. Now, whether you're looking at the G1 or the G7, it doesn't matter. You still need to have a high ballistic coefficient relative to some other bullets in the same available for the same caliber. So that high ballistic coefficient is very important. What does that mean for your rifle? Well, because you're shooting a higher or heavy for caliber bullet, you've got to make sure that the twist rate of the barrel is sufficient to stabilize that bullet as it leaves the muzzle. Now this is a 1 in 9. Ruger puts a 1 in 9, so it's 1 revolution for every 9 inches of barrel length. Okay? So a 1 in 9 can stabilize, in theory, out to about a 100 grain bullet in the 243 or 6 millimeter. In practice, what I found is I can stabilize a 90 to 95 grain bullet in this thing. And the 100s and 105s just do not give anything close to the accuracy I was expecting, and I'm talking about MOA or sub-MOA. The problem with too heavy of a bullet, apart from the fact that it may not stabilize in the barrel, is that you will not be able to drive it to fast enough speed or high enough velocity to actually carry you to long range, 1,000 yards let's say, and maintain supersonic speed. Maintaining supersonic speed all the way out to the farthest target you're going to shoot is absolutely important, critical for a long-range rifle. Another thing that's absolutely critical for a long-range rifle is the optics. The optics, I actually spend probably more time and more money on optics than I do on the rifle. So what do I look for in a scope? Well, number one, I look for 30 millimeter tube. I like that. I like a 50 or 56 millimeter objective. You go much smaller than that. In fact, 56, like that 220 Swift I showed you a minute ago, 56 millimeter objective is a lot bigger than a 50 millimeter. It doesn't sound like that's a whole lot of difference, but when I'm using these two rifles side by side, shoot a couple rounds with it and shoot a couple rounds with the other, this 50 millimeter objective is obviously quite a bit smaller in my field of view compared to my 56 millimeter. But there's really nothing wrong, terribly wrong, with a 50 millimeter. That's just fine too. The other thing that is really critical for long range shooting is that you should have a scope that is first focal plane, FFP. And how much power should that scope have? What are we looking for? Well, this is a 6 to 24, and to be honest with you, the 24 is actually more than necessary, and what you tend to see at the 24 power is mirage. You can actually see the wind, the movement of the winds out at the target, and the target never really looks very crisp if you have very much heat mirage and those sorts of things going on. So oftentimes for actual shooting, I'll dial this thing back to 18 power, maybe something around that range, 16 power. The previous scope that I had on that 220 Swift was a 4 to 16. This is 6 to 24. I would actually recommend about a 4 to 16 range, somewhere in there, and that's really what you need for long range shooting. You're also going to want to think about your reticles. Now the reticle that's going to work out really well for you is either going to be a MRAD, MILRAD, or an MOA type of reticle. And you're going to have not just the crosshairs itself, you're going to have lots of crosshairs or numerous crosshairs. And it's either going to be graduated in MOA, minutes of angle, or MILRADs, milradians. I have gotten very, very used to MOA. I like MOA, and that's what I kind of stick with. If I was going to do it all over again, I might do MILRADs. There's some advantages of milradians over MOA. But once you get used to one of those styles, you'll just want to stick with that and make the best use that you can. But you're going to want to have a scope that definitely has those different reticles inside of it, so you don't have to be spinning the dials, the turrets, all the time. You might just do a holdover using those reticles. And here's another thing to do. Once you get that scope, you get it all zeroed in for your rifle, and you've decided upon the cartridge, the round that you're going to be shooting, is go ahead and give that scope a test and see if the, let's say, 2 MOA holdover in your reticles shoots really exactly the same as 8 clicks, which would be 2 MOA on most scopes. Make sure that the number of clicks on your turret is equivalent to those reticles. Some of the cheaper optics, they'll have a whole bunch of reticles inside that, but they're really not accurate reticles. They'll say that they're 2 MOA, 4 MOA graduations and stuff, and you get out in the range and, well, it's not really that. Well, then it's a useless set of reticles. So you're going to make an investment in that optics. Most good optics are going to be, $900 on up from there, and there are some optics that are far more expensive than they really should be. No doubt about that. That I was just showing you a minute ago, that's a Vortex optic. I've had no trouble with Vortex. Actually, very, very excellent scopes and optics, and they'll run you $900 to $1,000, and some even more than that. Another piece to the long-range shooting puzzle is a spotting scope and a partner who acts as your spotter. You're going to want to have good optics here as well, but don't convince yourself that you're going to be able to sit at 600 yards, 500, 600, 700 yards with a spotting scope shooting a 243 Winchester or 220 Swift or something like that. The 220 Swift will get you out to 600, maybe 700 yards before it goes transonic. 243, 1,000 yards plus. But you're probably not going to see where that bullet impacts on a target, a paper target, or even these shoot and see targets, because that hole is really, really small. What you might see is if you have a steel gong and you got a spotting scope on it, you most likely will see it move a little bit when you hit, and you most likely will not see it through the rifle scope because of recoil. And then you're trying to get back into position, and it may have already settled back down. The steel gong may have already settled back down before you get the rifle scope settled on it. You might be thinking, did I actually hit that or not? So a spotter partner to help you out can be really good, especially if you are missing. They can call your shot and say, okay, I saw that one impact to the left or to the right, and help you dope the wind and all that stuff. That's a critical part of long-range shooting. If you got a partner who also enjoys long-range shooting, that is fantastic, because you get to shoot 5 rounds, let's say, then you act as spotter, flip-flop back and forth while your rifle is cooling and so on. So what you might want to look into is a semi-automatic long-range rifle. The DPMS makes a AR-15 based long-range rifle. It's called the NATO Reaper, R-E-P-R. Looks like a fantastic rifle. I've never handled one of those. I've never shot one. I have handled and shot DPMS. I think those are nice rifles. That is in .308 Winchester. That's a nice caliber. It's one of those calibers like the 243. In fact, the 243 case is based on necking down the .308 Winchester. Both of those are calibers that can go 1,000 meters. Actually, .308 a little bit less than the 243. They can go out 1,000 meters, 1,000 yards, and you can shoot them kind of all day long without really feeling it in the shoulder and ending up developing a flinch. And the other thing you won't feel is you won't feel it in the pocketbook, because those are far cheaper to shoot than a 50 BMG, 338 Lapua, and those sort of things. So that's just my take, some tips for you regarding long-range shooting.